Well, I don't think one should take those things personally. I think anyone who knows Finland knows that we have one of the largest militaries in Europe. We're security providers, not security consumers. And in this specific case, we are actually involved in three different operations to secure the Suez Canal, two of them EU operations and one the coalition of willing. I look at it from an operational perspective, and I think the US operation was a raving success. We do this because we want to secure the freedom of navigation and free trade, and that's a good thing.
Were you surprised that they were using Signal? Were you surprised that, do you use Signal to communicate with your colleagues other than I'll have a cup of tea at 3?
Well, I mean, we use different forms of communication, and Signal, of course, out of the public ones is one of the safest. But for us, that's not the issue. For us, the issue here is the operation, and that was successful.
We can go to the heart of the issue in a sense, which is the way in which this administration is viewing Europe. And I wonder at what point do European leaders like yourself realize that certain members of the administration do not have respect for either the sovereignty or indeed for Europe as a collective?
Well, I think the two observations on that. First thing is that the transatlantic relationship is obviously shifting. And the second one is a question. So what do you do about it? I think as president of Finland, there are at least two tracks that you deal with. One is a bilateral track, and you kind of ask the question, what can you do for America rather than what can America do for you? So a little bit of a reverse Kennedy. And there, Finland has icebreakers. We have really good defense material and technology, among other things. And then the other track is, well, how do you make sure that America stays engaged in European and transatlantic security? And that you need to work on by making NATO as appealing as possible and making the alternative cost of staying out of NATO too high. And I think that's what the American administration is trying to do. And I think they're actually doing the right thing. Europeans do need to take more responsibility for their own defense and their own security.
I suppose it always comes down to this very unpleasant question as to whether Europe still views the United States as a reliable ally. And in that context, I often hear one thing said privately, one thing said publicly.
Well, I think we have to keep on working at it. You have to understand that international relations and diplomacy are never static. So a lot of times you have to sort of earn the alliance, if you will. And of course, Finland has always had a very close relationship with the United States, as have the other Nordic countries. And now, especially that Finland and Sweden are in NATO and all the Nordic countries are in NATO, we continue to nurture and work on that relationship. I think alliances are twofold. One is values-based, and I would still argue that if you look at the US Constitution, if you look at the United States by and large, there's a strong value bond. There might be ideological differences right now, but that's part of democracy. And the other one is then interest-based alliances. And I think it's in the interest of both Europe and the United States to stay committed to each other, because together, of course, we're not only a security and military power, but we provide for roughly half of the world's GDP and trade. So, we have to stick this together, and sometimes we have disagreements, and in good relationships, you can deal with those, I think, in a sophisticated way.
How far do you think your fellow leaders in the European Council, how far has reality sunk in that the alliance is not what it was, that it's going to cost you a great deal more, and that you do need to consider European defense with arguably minimal US involvement? Has that reality sunk in?
Well, there was a former Finnish president after World War II who was called Juho Kusti Paasikivi, and he had this famous saying that the beginning of wisdom is to accept realities. And I think a lot of my colleagues in the alliance and in Europe by and large have accepted the realities that the transatlantic relationship is changing. And I actually think that it's a good thing that Donald Trump has been pushing Europe to take more responsibility for its own security and defense. And if I may push it a little bit, in the first 3 months of the presidency of Donald Trump, he has done more to push European security and defense than previous 30 years during the post-Cold War period. put together. And this is something that a lot of European leaders are coming to terms with. That's why we're talking about the increasing defense expenditure nationally. We're making the European Union into a defense union. There's even mutualization of debt when it comes to investing in the defense industry and many other things. So I do think that Europeans have woken up and smelt the coffee. So reality bites sometimes, and now we're working on it.